So, hello and welcome to part 10, Idolization versus Adoration, Building and Working, in the series A Long Walk, Walking with the Children of Israel. And this is part 10, which is the closeout of this series. I hope that you have enjoyed the series. If you've watched or listened to all of the parts, I pray that it has blessed you as much as it has blessed me. These have been some very on time sessions that have ministered to my life. Again, I get these twice. I get them when God gives them to me, the revelation, and then I get them also when I give them to you. So if it does not touch me, then I don't want to touch it, right? I don't want to do anything that's not going to be um something that ministers to my life. So with that being said, we're going to talk about building and working today. And if you paid attention to last week was about rest, right? And so the way that we're going to bring this out, the way that God wants me to bring this out is by talking about what happened before the rest and what happens after the rest. And what we'll find is building and working typically happen before the rest and typically happen after the rest. And I'll give you several examples of that happened in the Bible, right? Because I like to make sure that we have some examples of that. Um, Here are our major scriptures. When God has his way, sometimes we end up using some other ones, but Exodus 36 through 40, which is the remaining portion of Exodus, shows the building and the working, right? I believe 35 is where he talked about the Sabbath. So it's when they were resting, right? So they rested, but then afterwards, we'll talk about what happened after that rest. That was in verses 36 through 40. Um, then we have Genesis 2, verses 2 through 3, and then chapters 3 and 4 of Genesis as well, Matthew 8 and Mark 4. And the reason why they're together is because those were the accounts of the Gospels. So they really talked about the same situation where Jesus was on the boat. So it was the same situation, but just different accounts. One was Matthew's account, one was Mark's account. And then 1 Kings 18 and 19, we'll be talking a little bit about Elijah. And there are other examples, but these are just the ones that I really wanted to pull out. And there are some reasons why I wanted to pull these specific ones out. We'll talk about those in just a minute. But these are our major scriptures. Again, it's not, we see how God moves. So there may be more. Okay. I'm a teacher, so let's talk definitions. What do I mean when I say building? Well, when I say building, we're talking about constructing, construction, putting parts and materials together. But it's also, and this is the one definition that I knew I had to have. This is what I was looking for, to make something stronger or more intense. See, what we don't understand when we think building, we think construction, right? But what about building the kingdom? Right? Building the kingdom, we're not doing that brick by brick. We're building the kingdom life by life. And so sometimes we're making something stronger or more intense, but because there's no tangible bricks, there's no tangible, then it doesn't seem like we're doing anything because we can't see it. We can't visually see us making something stronger or intense until that thing, especially the kingdom. Like we don't see how when we plant, God says one plants, one water, God gives the increase. I told y'all there might be more scriptures. One plants, one water, God gives the increase. Let me find that scripture so I can give you that. But when we're planting, we don't get to see the rest of the process sometimes. And so when we plant, we don't realize that we're making the kingdom stronger or more intense because we don't see the rest of the process. We don't know what happened with the person. We have no idea that we were a very integral part of their process. Sometimes we never know, and sometimes we don't know for years until we bump back into that person and their life is changed. And they're like, I just want to thank you for that time when you talked to me. And you're like, what time? I don't even remember. Excuse me. You're like, I don't even remember talking to you. And they'll tell you what you said and how you impacted their lives. And you're like, oh, wow. Right. You're like, oh, I didn't realize why, because you were just planting and you had no idea that what you were saying to them was so pivotal at the time. It was what their hearts needed to start to change. You just didn't know. It has happened to me quite often where I was just doing what I was doing, being who I felt God was leading me to be at the time, and didn't take thought of it. And then years later, see the person, they like, that time you did this or that. And I'm not saying that to, to toot my own horn, because it ain't me. If you notice, I said being who I thought or felt led to be. It was what God led me to be. So, it's just the point where, and that scripture is found, one plants, one waters, but God gives the increase. I think that's 1 Corinthians 3, verses 6 through 9. I believe that's the one. 1 Corinthians 3, verses 6 through 9. But yeah, I mean, so there are times when we don't know, but we don't see it all the time because we don't see it. See, when we're constructing something and we're putting the parts and the materials together, we see the parts and the materials. So it's easy to construct a building because we see the building when we finish, but we don't always get to see the build as in making something stronger and intense in the kingdom. We don't always get to see that. And so therefore we oftentimes discount the productivity. We discount our because we can't see it, we discount our impact, our influence. Okay. So the next definition is the dimensions or proportions of a person's or animal's body. And then the last definition, the style or form of construction of something, especially a vehicle. Okay. But the one that I really wanted to bring out for this lesson, especially, is the verb to make stronger or more intense, because each of us, even as we just live our lives, like sometimes you don't have to say a thing to a person, but just the way that you carry yourself and just the way that you carry the God in you will impact them. And let me say this, just like it'll impact them, sometimes it will trigger their demons. So you'll find people that will just attack you and not like you for no reason. And oftentimes it is a reason. It is because your God, the light in you, is so bright that it just automatically convicts them. I used to struggle with this. I used to struggle with this so badly because I was the friend that folks didn't invite to go places. And I was like, well, what is it? I thought maybe it was because of my weight. And to some degree it might have been. But even after I lost weight, then I was like, but I'm still not getting invited. And it's because I had to realize one day, I promise you, God said to me one day, nobody wants to get high with me. And I was thinking, wait, what? See, I'll go to places, and if people drink or get high or whatever they do, that's their business. But I'll sit right there and be just as content. I don't have to do that. I just don't have to. I remember one time I went to a party. A friend of mine invited me to a party at his house. So it was it wasn't nothing at the club or nothing. And I went to his house, and everybody was drinking and doing whatever they wanted to do, which was fine. I don't drink. Okay, that's not what I do. Every now and then, maybe I've had a glass of wine or something like that, but that's in the privacy of my own home or whatever. I just that's just not my thing. Like this is not my thing. Anyway, long story short, when I was there, people were so uncomfortable. They kept saying, "You want something to drink?" "No, I don't want anything." "You sure? You sure?" And I'm thinking, no. And it bothers people when you aren't partaking because now they feel convicted. That ain't got nothing to do with me. So God was like, I promise you, it's like one day he was like, nobody wants to get high with me, and you carry me. So they're uncomfortable because you're not getting ready to drink. You're not getting ready to do this. You're not getting ready to do that. You're not getting ready to do this. And so because you're not getting ready to do those things, it makes them uncomfortable. They want you to do what they do so they feel comfortable. And so I literally had to understand it. And now I'm in a much better headspace about it because now I get it. But I just didn't understand it for so long. Okay. So we have to understand that making something stronger or more intense may not always be visible to the eye, but we have to keep on doing what we're doing with faith. Okay. The next set of definitions are work, because we're talking about building and working today. So work, of course, is the activity involving mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a purpose or a result. Okay. It's a task or task to be undertaken, something a person or thing has to do. Keep in mind, has to do. This is our calling. That definition is related to our calling. Something that we have to do. Now, don't get me wrong. God won't force you to do it. He won't force you. But he has a way of squeezing you until you say yes. Don't get me wrong. Okay, Jonah, right? He'll put you in a wet, dark place, you know what I mean? And until you say yes. But then there are some people who still won't say yes. and he will hand them right over to a reprobate mind. And once they're handed over to a reprobate mind and he takes his hands off of them and they don't say yes, then he'll leave them to what they go through. I've watched it happen. I've watched him take his hands off, and I've watched that person still say no, and I've watched destruction happen. Because the Bible says pride goes before destruction, the Holy Spirit before a fall. So if you do not tell God yes, he will remove his hands. And when he removes his hands, here's his hedge of protection, and all of those things are gone. And if you still won't say yes, then you'll be handed over to the destruction that comes as a result of his hedge of protection being gone. Okay? The verb work is to be engaged in physical or mental activity in order to achieve a result. So it's to do the work. And then last but not least, the other verb is the proper or effective operation or function of a machine or system. So for this one, I wanted us to really focus on the first two definitions. The first one, of course, talking about mental or physical effort done in order to achieve a purpose or result, because that's the work that we do after rest, and something a person or thing has to do. That's our calling. Okay, so those are the two that I really want to focus on. So let's talk about before and after the rest. Our first example is who? God. Of course. Of course. God was, God is, you know, I used to be on the hamster wheel of work. I used to think that if I wasn't doing something, I was lazy. And that partially came from my grandmother, because my grandmother, you know, was always doing something. Like if you weren't doing something, she taught us that you were lazy, like you weren't applying yourself, because that's what she was taught. But my grandmother also had a slavery mentality, because my grandmother was, you know, on the, now she picked cotton, like her and my older, you know, siblings, not siblings, my older mother's siblings, excuse me, they picked cotton. And so they picked cotton from sun up to sundown. My grandmother had to cook. She had loads of children. My grandmother had a total of 11 children that were born. She had 13 in total. And so imagine having all these children. You got to feed those children. You still got to please your husband, and you got to pick cotton all day, you know, from sun up to sundown. And you got to farm. So you got to milk the cows and, you know, deal with the hogs and the chickens and all that stuff. And this is what every day looked like. So this is when I tell you, and when I tell my clients, that sometimes the things that we learn from people that we may trust and know had our best interest at hand, that doesn't work for us. This is what I'm talking about. Because while my grandmother was teaching us what she knew didn't work for me in this time. Because I found myself working. And I was like, this is not, I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. And God was like, I didn't tell you to do that. Sometimes we have to detach what we've learned from the person and their importance to us. My grandmother didn't mean no harm when she taught me this, but she taught me this under a mentality that no longer works for me, or doesn't work for me, or never did. I have to understand where she's coming from. She was coming from a slave mentality. And so therefore, a slavery or a poverty mentality does not work for me, so I cannot eat from that plate. But many of us are carrying forward things that we have learned because of who taught us. Not because the thing works for us, but because of who taught us that thing. And because it's grandma and Mima and Papa and my mother or what have you, we won't disconnect from the thing because we feel like we're disconnecting from the person, but that's not true. You got to let it go. If it's not serving you well and it's not something that God is commanding us to do, we have to let it go. If God rested, it didn't say he needed rest, it said he rested. Nothing said he needed rest. Nothing said that God wasn't going to be able to go on if he didn't rest that day. He chose to rest. So if God rested, why do we feel like we don't have to rest? I'm so confused on that. One day, God asked me that, if I rested, what make you think you don't need to? And I was done. When I was outdone. I was outdone, okay? So before the rest, God created the whole world. Let there be light. They go to water, the lakes, the seas, all of this stuff, animals and humans in 6 days. Then he decided on the 7th day, we're going to rest today. We're going to rest today. And we're going to look at the scripture, because I don't want to, I don't want anybody to say, well, she didn't read the scripture for that. We're looking at Genesis 2. Genesis 2. Okay, Genesis 2, 2 and 1. We'll start at 1, even though, I did mark 2 and 3 because that's where the main parts are. But we'll start at 1. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was complete. So see what I just said? He created everything. Heavens and the earth and everything in them. He created everything, whole world. Verse 2. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation. So he rested. It didn't say so he needed to rest. It says so he rested. He finished all his work. So he was like, I could rest today because I'm done with my work. So he rested from all his work. I'm reading in the New Living Translation. And verse 3 says, and God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. He had created everything in 6 days. And so day number 7, he said, you know what? I'm good. I'm good. I'm gonna take a rest. I'm gonna take a break. So why do we feel like we don't need to? Because we have this hustle culture that tells us sleep when you die. Oh, okay. If you feel like you gonna sleep when you die, then when you die may come sooner because you ain't sleeping. And we talked about that last week. Okay. And so before he rested, he created the whole world, animals, humans, everything. He took a rest on the 7th day, but what did he do after the rest? He went back to work. He went back to building. He went back to work. He was dealing with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and what they were doing. He was dealing with Cain and Abel, the serpent. He went back to work. He went back to building. So we need rest because we're typically resting in between hard seasons, or maybe we're coming out of a hard season or coming out of this season and we take a rest and then we get ready for the next thing that he is having us do. And it don't have to necessarily be hard. It don't have to necessarily be hard and tumultuous or nothing like that. But here we're resting so that we have the strength to move forward for the next thing he's going to have us do. And one thing we know for certain is the next thing he's going to have us do is going to be just like the first thing he had us do. Is going to come with some level of opposition. The enemy is not going to be like, oh, okay, I'll go ahead and let you. No. So it'll be some level of opposition. It may not be as hard as the season that we may have come out of, but it's going to be some level of opposition that we just have to be sharp. Okay. And so God is like, let me let you have a season of rest so that you are sharp and strengthened. You are sharpened and strengthened to move forward. Okay. So our first example is God. And we see what he did, afterwards. Adam and Eve dealt with Cain and Abel. He had to deal with these things, and that was a part of his work. That's a part of him being God, right? That's a part of him being God. Genesis, this is where the 3rd chapter of Genesis comes in, where it talks about the serpent was a shrewd animal. And of course, he had to tell them, you can eat this, don't eat that, don't do this, don't do that. He told them what to do. And after he told them what to do, they did what they wanted to do, right? So in chapter 2, I'll tell you exactly where it is. In chapter 2, he told them about eating of the fruit. Okay, that was verse 4. Chapter 2, verse 4 all the way down talked about the man and the woman. So it tells where he told them, you may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden except the tree of the fruit, knowledge of good and evil. That's 4 verses 16 and 17. So he addressed that. He addressed everything, okay, for the man and the woman. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, all of that. He talked about all of that. He talked about a man leaving the father and the mother and joining to the wife, and they united as one, all of that. He talked about all of that, okay? And so then when we get to chapter 3, in chapter 3, this is when they decided to eat of the fruit anyway, right? And once they ate of the fruit, then things changed, and that was that. That's when God came and asked, where are you? And he already knew where they was. When God asked us a question, he already know the answer, so ain't no sense in lying, right? And so, but the point of this is God went back to work. Then when Cain and Abel came, God went back to work. So he went back to work after he rested, okay? Our next example, of course, is Jesus. And I'll use one example because Jesus was still away, okay? Jesus would go to the mountain. He'd go somewhere. He'd leave. Like, let me go recharge. But if you look at the life of Jesus and the things that he went about doing, He needed to. He had people pulling on his garments. He had people pulling at him. He had folks, criticizing him and trying to trip him up all day. In order for him to stay sharpened and strengthened, he had to go to the mountain. He had to fast and pray. And even when he fasted and prayed, what happened? Here come the enemy. So even when he tried to steal away, here come the enemy. Turn this bread into stone. Look here. Leave me alone. But before he rested in this specific time, we're going to look at Matthew 8. Okay, so I just took one instance. Okay, one instance, and this is the parable of the boat. This is when the boat, when he was in the storm. So I only used that one. But there are so many instances, I think like 8 different instances or whatever, where Jesus was like, hey, I'm going on up to this mountain. Leave me alone. He went away from the people because it was always crowds of people. Crowds of people. So he had to go away from the crowd. So he knew what to do so he can strengthen and sharpen. Okay. So looking at Matthew 8, it says, Jesus heals a man with leprosy. So verse 1, large crowds. Remember I said large crowds follow Jesus. Can you just imagine if you were just walking and large crowds were just following you everywhere you went? Large crowds followed Jesus as he came down the mountainside. Suddenly, a man with leprosy approached him and knelt before him. Lord, the man said, if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean. Jesus reached out and touched him. I am willing, he said, be healed. And instantly the leprosy disappeared. Then Jesus said to him, don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses. See, Jesus didn't come to do away with the law. For those who have been healed of leprosy, this will be a public testimony that you have been cleansed. Okay, that was the end of that. Then what happened? When Jesus returned to Capernaum, a Roman officer came and pleaded with him. Lord, my young servant lies in bed, paralyzed and in terrible pain. Jesus said, I will come and heal him. But the officer said, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come into my home. Just say the word from where you are and my servant will be healed. I know this because I am under the authority of my superior officers and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go and they go and come and they come. And if I say to my slaves, do this, they do it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to those who were following him, they still following him. He said, I tell you the truth, I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel. And I tell you this, that many Gentiles will come from all over the world, from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. But many Israelites, those for whom the kingdom was prepared, will be thrown into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the Roman officer, go back home because you believe it has happened. And the young servant was healed the same hour. What happened next? Jesus healed many people. When Jesus arrived at Peter's house, Peter's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a high fever, but when Jesus touched her hand, the fever left her. Then she got up and prepared a meal for him. What happened next? That evening, many demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. He cast out the evil spirits with a simple command, and he healed all the sick. This fulfills the word of the Lord through the prophet Isaiah, who said he took our sickness and removed our diseases. He did all of that before the boat. Before the boat. Okay. Skipping down to verse 23. We're in the 8th chapter of Matthew, verse 23. Then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. Suddenly, a fierce storm struck the lake and waves breaking into the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. What was he doing? He was resting. He was tired. My gosh. He done healed leprosy, the paralyzed man, the demon-possessed man. He done healed Peter's mother-in-law. He done healed this person, that person. He done, took the fever out of her body. He done did this, he done did that. Then in between that, he actually had a crowd before him, and he had to instruct his disciples, okay, hey, if you're going to follow me, here's the call. So he had to lecture them, right? And then he get into the boat. He like, I'm tired. I'm about to take a nap. He takes a nap. And then verse 25 said the disciples went and woke him up, shouting, Lord, save us. They thought they was going to drown. And Jesus responded, why are you afraid? You have so little faith. My gosh. He's like, I am tired. And y'all woke me up for this. So what did he do after the rest? After the rest, it says, then he got up and rebuked the wind and waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. So he done healed leprosy, healed this person, healed that person, rebuked demons, all of that. Tried to take a nap, was awakened, and had to get up and rebuke the wind and the waves. The disciples were amazed. Who is this man? They asked. Even the winds and waves obey him. But then guess what? Jesus was not done. He heals 2 demon-possessed men. So what did he do after the rest? The same thing he did before it. He kept right on going with his work. With his work, all of which was doing what? Building the kingdom. Building the kingdom, okay? Our next example, the children of Israel. The children of Israel. So before the rest, they endured slavery, 10 plagues, pardon of the Red Sea, revelation of the Lord at Sinai, 10 commandments, and idolatry, because we cannot forget about the golden calves that Aaron made for them, right? So looking over at Exodus 35, okay, that's where I think we were last week. This is when Moses called them all together and gave them instructions for the Sabbath. He says in verse 2, Exodus 35 and 2, you have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day must be the Sabbath day of complete rest, a holy day dedicated to the Lord. Anyone who works on that day must be put to death. You must not even light a fire in any of your homes on the Sabbath. Okay, so Moses was like, and God had told him, let me see, in verse 34, I believe this is where God told him, go tell them about that. Hold on, let me make sure. I don't want to be saying the wrong thing. Because I believe God told him to give them some instructions before I believe God told him to give him some instructions. It didn't necessarily say what the instructions were. It's just that the next, in 34, it's just that by 35, he came and gave them instructions for the Sabbath. So I don't want to say that's what the instructions meant, but it seems like that's what they meant, okay? But right after that, then they started talking about the tabernacle. So he said, okay, we're going to rest. So they started implementing the rest once a week, right? And after the rest, what happened? Oh, okay. Well, guess what? It's time to start building the tabernacle. God raised up the 2 that he had taught or given great wisdom and ability and expertise in crafts. And then after the rest came the building of the tabernacle. So after the establishment of the Sabbath came the building of the tabernacle, the building of the Ark of the Covenant, the building of the altar of the burnt offering, the making of ephods and all types of garments, and so much more. Like if you look at chapter 36 through 40, they made a lot of stuff. They did a lot, a whole lot. Building the courtyards, taking inventory of materials. Let me see, what else did they do? Making the clothes, and the ephod was a part of the garments too. But making the garments, making chest pieces, and not chest like chess, no, chest like chest. Okay, chest pieces, and additional clothing for the priests. And then at the end of Exodus 39, Moses comes to inspect what? The work. Moses came to inspect the work that had been done. It says in Exodus 39 and 32, it says, and so at last the tabernacle was finished. The Israelites had done everything just as the Lord had commanded Moses. They had done. If we look back at our definition of work, to do work. To do work. So they had done. He looked at everything they had done. Okay. Verse 33, and they brought the entire tabernacle to Moses, the sacred tent with all of its furnishing, clasps, frames, crossbars, posts, and bases, the tent coverings. Like they brought him the ark of the covenant and his carrying poles. It's like it lists so much stuff, curtains, everything. And it says what in 43 and 42, we'll go to 42. So the people of Israel follow all of the Lord's instructions to Moses. And 43 says, then Moses inspected all their work. When he found it had been done, just as the Lord had commanded, he blessed them. God will bless us for our work, for building. But we have to learn to rest so that we have the strength and the sharpening that we need to be able to fulfill the assignment. And when we get to Exodus 40, the tabernacle is complete. It is complete. Okay? So again, the children of Israel went through slavery and plagues and parting of the Red Sea and thinking they were going to be captive and revelation of the Lord at Sinai and 10 commandments and idolatry with golden calves. They went through all this stuff before they learned about rest and implementing rest in their daily, their weekly routine, one day a week. And then after learning about rest, that's when they were commissioned to build and to work. Okay. And they actually created something that God was willing to bless through Moses. Okay. Last but not least, Elijah. I want to talk about Elijah, and I'm sure you probably knew he was one of them. If we go over to 1 Kings 18. 1 Kings 18. Before the rest was the contest on Mount Carmel. Okay, the contest on Mount Carmel, which is when, around this time, Jezebel was, wreaking havoc on a lot of the prophets. She was killing them. She was a prophet slayer. And so, she had just been wreaking havoc. Just her and Ahab just was tearing things up. So Elijah said, listen, it says later on, we're going to start at chapter 18, verse 1. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 1. Later on, in the 3rd year of the drought, the Lord said to Elijah, go and present yourself to King Ahab. Tell him that I will soon send rain. So Elijah went to appear before Ahab. Meanwhile, the famine had become very severe in Samaria. So Ahab summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of the palace. Now, Obadiah, keep in mind, was a devoted follower of the Lord. Verse 4, once when Jezebel had tried to kill all the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had hidden 100 of them in 2 slaves. He put 50 in one caves, in 2 caves. He put 50 prophets in each cave and supplied them with food and water. Verse 5, Ahab said to Obadiah, we must check every spring and valley in the land to see if we can find enough grass to save at least some of my horses and mules. So they divided the land between them. Ahab went one way by himself and Obadiah went another way by himself. And as Obadiah was walking along, he suddenly saw Elijah coming toward him. Obadiah recognized him at once and bowed low to the ground before him and said, is it really you, my Lord Elijah? He asked. Keep in mind, he thought, probably thought Elijah was dead, And Elijah said, yes, it is. Elijah replied, now go and tell your master Elijah is here. Obadiah was like, uh-oh. It says, oh, sir, Obadiah protested, what harm have I done to you that you are sending me to my death at the hands of Ahab? Because he's like, if I tell him that you here, it's going to be some smoke in the city, right? And he's going to take it out on me. For I swear by the Lord your God that the king has searched every nation and kingdom on earth from end to end to find you, because they was tired of Elijah. They was sick of him. And each time he was told Elijah not here. So he thinking, so he going to think I hid you, along with them other 100 prophets that they don't know nothing about, right? King Ahab forced the king of that nation to swear to the truth of his claim. And now you saying, go and tell your master Elijah's here, but as soon as I leave you, the spirit of the Lord will carry you away to who knows where. When Ahab comes and cannot find you, he gonna kill me. Yet I have been a true servant of the Lord all my life. Has no one told you, my Lord, about the time when Jezebel was trying? Uh-oh, I lost my place. Hold on. When Jezebel was trying Okay, hold on. I'm sorry. Lost my spot. I hit the wrong button. Uh, 1 second. Oh, Jezebel was trying to kill the Lord's prophets at 13. I hid 100 of them in well, I keep saying slaves, 2 caves, and supplied them with food and water. And now you say, go tell your master Elijah's here, sir. If I do that, Ahab will certainly kill me. But Elijah said, I swear by the Lord Almighty, in whose presence I stand, that I will present myself to Ahab this very day. So Obadiah went to tell Ahab that Elijah had come, and Ahab went out to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw him, he exclaimed, so it is really you, you troublemaker of Israel. I have made no trouble for Israel, Elijah replied. You and your family are the troublemakers, for you have refused to obey the commandments of the Lord and have worshipped the images of Baal instead. Now summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who are supported by Jezebel. So Ahab summoned all the people of Israel and the prophets to Mount Carmel. Then Elijah stood in front of them and said, how much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people were completely silent. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of the Lord who is left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Now bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish and cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood of their altar. But without setting fire to it, I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood on the altar, but not set fire to it. Then call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. And all the people agreed. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, you go first, for there are many of you. Choose one of the bulls and prepare it and call on the name of your God, but do not set fire to the wood. And guess what? They did it. And they was shouting, and you can read the rest for yourself. They were shouting and they were stabbing themselves, and blood was everywhere because they was doing everything they could to try to get fire to fall from heaven. They was out there all day. All day. They was out there all day. It says in verse 27, about noontime, Elijah began mocking them. You'll have to shout louder, he scoffed, for surely he is a god. Perhaps he is daydreaming or relieving himself, or maybe he's away on a trip, or he's asleep, or needs to be awakened. So they shouted louder, and following their normal customs, they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood gushed out. They raved all afternoon. So just imagine, you've been out there all day watching them and stabbing themselves and doing all kind of crazy stuff. But there was no response, no reply. It says they raved all afternoon until the time of the evening sacrifice. So y'all been out here all day hollering and nothing. Verse 30 says, then Elijah called to the people, come over here. They all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. He took 12 stones, one to represent each of the tribes of Israel, and he used the stones to rebuild the altar in the name of the Lord. Then he dug a trench around the altar large enough to hold about 3 gallons. He piled wood on the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid the pieces on the wood. Then he said, fill 4 large jars with water and pour the water over the offering and the wood. And they had done this, he said. After they had done this, he said, do the same thing again. And when they were finished, he said, now do it a 3rd time. So they did as he said. And the water ran around the altar and even filled the trench. At the usual time for offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are the God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all this at your command. O Lord, answer me. Answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have brought them back to yourself. Immediately, the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stone, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trenches. And when the people saw it, they fell down on their face on the ground and cried out. The Lord, he is God. Yes, the Lord is God. Then Elijah commanded, seize all the prophets of Baal, don't let a single one escape. So the people seized them all, and Elijah took them down to Kishon Valley and killed them all there. This all happened before he rested. This was the contest on Mount Carmel. Okay, this was the contest on Mount Carmel. How did Elijah get to rest? Well, he found out Ahab went and told Jezebel. Ooh, let me tell you what happened. That's the type of husband Ahab was. He gonna tell his wife, and his wife gonna do something. He didn't do nothing. His wife gonna do something. So it says, looking at chapter 19, when Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah: may the God strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. And forget about all that had happened. And listen, Elijah was human. He had just watched God send the fire from heaven. But when Jezebel said she was going to kill him, he believed her because she had killed everybody else. And so what did he do? He ran. He fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. He just told him, just Lord, please, because I'm tired and enough is enough. Enough is enough. But what happened? When he asked God to just take his life, God said he just need a nap. He just need a nap and something to eat. So it says in verse 5, then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. Now, where'd that come from? Ain't no oven out here. Hot stones? What are stones? Where? From where? God can make provision. He will make provision. So he ate and drank and laid down again. He was still tired. Because not only did he have he need physical rest, but he needed rest from mental anguish too. See, sometimes we need, it's different. I told you last week that there were different types of rest, right? So he didn't just he needed physical rest. He needed spiritual rest. He needed mental rest. He needed emotional rest. He was scared. So not only was he scared, but he just ran into the wilderness after fighting and the whole contest, which took all day, cutting up a bull, putting water in trenches, or instructing people to put water in trenches. He'd have been out here all day while they hollering and all this type of stuff. He was physically tired. He was mentally tired. He was emotionally tired. And God was like, you don't need me to take your life. You need some rest. But if we don't get rest, we will be delusional as to what we need. And so again, he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to do what? To travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai. Because he needed to be sharpened and strengthened, and that could only come through rest. But after the rest, we have to go and build. And one of the things that he did after the rest was, because he was so afraid and because he wasn't, on the plan of God, God said, go back the way you came. I want you to anoint Jehu, because he knew Jehu was going to go kill Jezebel. He wasn't scared of Jezebel. So go anoint him. And then I want you to go get Elijah, because I'm getting ready to train Elisha, because I'm going to train your replacement, because you're too scary for me. Okay, you allowing fear to come in between what I need you to do. So let me have you start training your replacement. But he still gave him what? Instructions. He gave him instructions. Okay, after the rest, he gave him instructions. Okay. So the major points that I want to make here is, after rest comes restoration, but restoration requires work. For some reason, we think that restoration is going to be God just laying out the plan before us. No, we have to take part in that plan too. So after rest comes restoration, but restoration requires work. Okay, the restoration of a thing requires us to participate in some way, to be obedient in some way, for us to do and carry the load with God in some way. Okay, God preserves us through rest for his plan to prevail. His purpose was, Elijah, let me give you rest, because once you come to, now, you won't be afraid. Now you won't be in giving us rest will give time for us to remember who God is. But Elijah was still scared and still talking to him crazy. He like, hey, look, I ain't got time for this. I done went through this already with Moses. Like, I'm not going to go through trying to convince you or nothing. Go get Elisha, and start training him, because I'm not going to try to convince you that you can do the job. Not going to do it. So let's train your replacement, because we're not going to go through this. But God preserves us through rest for his plan to prevail. How do I know that? Because the very thing that all of our examples did afterwards was build and work. So he gives us the rest so that we can continue on with what? His plan. If we do not take the time to rest, we will not have the strength we need for the next journey. We won't have the strength that we need. We won't be sharp enough for the next thing. This is how we'll go into a season already handicapped. Go into a season, like a bird with one wing, because we didn't take the time to rest. Instead, we were full of worry and angst and unforgiveness and different things like that. And so we have decided, I'm not forgiving them, and I'm not. So instead of using the season to rest in the Lord, to rest our bodies, to rest, we are still trying to go and do it. Some of us are money hungry and trying to get money, do this, do that. And God is saying, I need you to rest for the next season. And we don't rest for the next season. And so then the next season comes, and now we're saying, God, we need rest. And he said, I tried to give you rest, but you didn't want to adhere to what I was saying to do. So if we don't take the time to rest when God appoints us, there's a time appointed. If we don't take the time to rest when the next season comes, or sometimes we'll miss it. We'll miss the blessing. We'll miss it because we're not ready for it. And God, like, I'm not going to let you tear up my stuff. I'm not going to let you. No. We'll miss it. We'll miss the door because we don't have the strength to make it through that thing. And God knows that. Spiritual rest, I said this last week. I had to keep this one. Spiritual rest is an act of God's mercy for us, because he knows what we can endure, what we can take. And he knows after we've been beat up on in the season, he's like, okay, that's enough. That's enough. Let up off of her, let up off of him. That's enough. And what is that? That's mercy. Because of God's mercies, we're not consumed. Because of that spiritual rest, we're not consumed. Okay? Just as rest is found, that should have been found with a D, but just as rest is found in the presence of God, so are the next set of instructions. Did you notice that when Jesus went away, he often came back stronger, but also with the next set of instructions? When Moses went up to the mountains, what did he get? The next set of instructions. When Elijah even went after he rested, what did he get? He got the next set of instructions. He just was struggling with doing what he was supposed to do. But then God told him, okay, go back to where you came. Okay, he still got the next set of instructions. It's just, God was just like, okay, all right, go back to where you came. So the rest and peace is in the presence of God, but as we rest, God also gives us the next set of instructions. I can attest to that. Because as I'm in a season of rest, God has already given me the next set of instructions for me. God's rest takes us away from worry and stress and physical labor and anxiety, but we have to make a conscious choice to remain there. During the season of rest, God will take us away from those things. I didn't say he'll take those things away from us. I say he'll take us away from them. He will. But we have to make a conscious choice to remain there by doing our part. When he tells us, let this go, let that go, let him go, let her go, let me handle this. If we don't make the conscious choice to leave it there and let him, do what he say do, then guess what? We won't rest. We'll go right back up to number 3. If we do not take the time to rest, we won't have the strength. Why? Because we were wrestling with something that he said, I got it. I got it. He'll take us away from those things, meaning he will give us that hedge of protection. He will give us that covering. He will give us what we need in order to make it through that season of rest without the worry and the stress and the physical. But we got to make a decision to stay there. And most of the time, we'll go back to the very things that cause us to worry and stress and the physical labor. We'll leave doors open for those things. But we have to, make a mind shift, first of all, that some stuff just ain't gonna worry us no more. Do what you do. Like, do what you want. Do what you do. Some stuff just ain't gonna worry us. And it's easier said than done. Hear me clearly. It's easier said than done. But we have to make a conscious choice, meaning it all starts in the mind, to remain in the peace, remain in the presence, remain in the rest. And what we do often, requires, it often determines, I should say, whether we remain in God's rest or if we remain in the worry, stress, and the physical labor that he's trying to keep us from, so that we can get the strengthening and the sharpening that we need to go into the next season. Okay? So I'll stop right now for questions and prayer.